you cannot manicure it, but you can really do a pretty interesting job in terms of presenting interviews. It also does this kind of stuff, which is we're ad libbing as we're already live.
Right, right.
So all right. So Hanno Hauenstein, I will let you introduce yourself, but I mean, we are in the same city. We have collaborated on projects,
Right.
but we have not met each other. We have not been flesh and blood in front of each other, which is kind of
Yes,
remarkable.
I feel like we've met each other before, but like we haven't actually met each other physically yet. No, but
Yeah.
like I'm a big admirer of your work and your courage and your sort of like your lack of hesitation when it comes to like finding the right terminology for describing what.
Well, I mean, I would exchange, praise, but I mean, I think that for people that read international media, you know, you're omnipresent. You have become really
Okay.
quite important, I think, in terms of for people like myself who could not figure out whether these things could be said. So you were really trailblazing to a large degree. But I will let you present yourself.
Happy to hear that. No, I'm a journalist. I'm an independent journalist. I do focus on culture and politics. I actually did a fair amount of art writing in the years prior to 2023, but like the escalation in Israel Palestine leading up to a genocide, which we're having on our phones every day, uh, went parallel with me becoming a freelancer actually after I left Berliner Zeitung. So I kind of, in the past few years, my work has been much more focused on Gaza and my reporting from the West Bank, which is something I do for close to 15 years now. I've been working and living in the area as a journalist. I'm not Jewish, but I'm very committed to sort of reporting from there for quite some time, and I think that's really shaped my views quite a bit. And yeah, basically, I think my writing has appeared in many German outlets, and also as you hinted at, international outlets as well, like the Guardian and the Intercept. And I think that basically sums it up. We can go more into I mean, the reason we're speaking today, I assume, is also partly because of an article which I wrote for The Guardian a few days ago, which is an op-ed on the killing and murdering of our colleagues, which I know from you, Martin, is like something that like very much gets to you as well as it does to me. Not only
Yeah.
the thing itself, the things we are witnessing for the past 22 months, the fact that like our journalists are so I mean our colleagues on the ground are so kind of exposed and hunted down with such unspeakable cynicism and such blunt done so openly, but also that like there's such a huge lack of solidarity on the parts of like Western media outlets. And I think when we speak about Western media and in vis-a-vis Gaza, in a way, I think Germany is always kind of like a looking glass of like things are just like a tad more radical here and a tad more like crazy in the sense of like lack of empathy and distortion.
Most certainly. I mean, I think that um, it's worth pointing out that to some degree, we both have somewhat of a similar, say, course within German media. We were both within organizations that were established media operations, and we both were shown our way out. For, in my case, I mean, I would most certainly say ideological and political circumstances in that context related to Gaza and related to Palestine, and you had somewhat of a similar experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I mean, ironically so, because I think I like you, I also get a lot of blowback online for speaking out on Palestine and Israel on Twitter and social media and for publishing texts about these subjects. But interestingly enough, like the blowback I received within my newspaper was not related to that subject. It was actually related to like another authoritarian slash fascist government in Hungary, which was like I was tweeting about like an event a very, in my view, very uncritical interview that was conducted between the publisher of the newspaper I was working for, with Viktor Orban. And I felt like, for me, that was a red line, not only because the interview was done so uncritically and so sort of like apologetically, but also because it was kind of presented to the public by the newspaper as if like we were all kind of like standing behind that way of doing interviews. And I felt like this is something I have to slightly distance myself from, which after I tweeted about this, I lost my position as Ressortleiter, which is like this kind of German concept of like senior editor running like one of the sections of a newspaper. And following up to that process, I basically just felt like things are getting a little bit more difficult in this in this paper, and I eventually decided to leave. But of course, I'm no stranger to, internal newsroom pressure to things related to Israel-Palestine. That also happened at Berliner Zeitung, and it happened regularly. But it's not the reason I left.
Yeah. So no, I think that the point that I was trying to make was not related directly to Gaza or to Palestine, but was more related to something that, for me, I mean, having moved here 15 years ago, was quite new.
Yeah.
Which is the amount of internal pressure and the tendency of newsrooms and editorial rooms not to circle the wagons, not to protect their journalists,
Yeah.
not to say, like, we stand by you and we're going to sort of give you the shield for the sake of journalistic freedom and the integrity of the profession.
Absolutely.
I've been in an endless number of situations, and probably the most memorable for me was the purge inside Deutsche Welle of my Arab colleagues, at least one of them, Basan, in Lebanon, with whom I had worked. And they just basically, there was this witch hunt, which proceeded from German media about them being anti-Semites. Of course, assertions were broadly about Israel. And they were summarily eliminated from the system. They were really just fired.
Wow.
And to me, that was something really quite new. This sense that they would actually hang people in the street so that everybody could see that Deutsche Welle was standing in line with Israel. And of course, I mean, from that point on in 2022, everything was downhill. So I want to read a quote from your article on The Guardian. I hope you don't blush. But to me is, if not the core, because there is really quite a bit of stuff that speaks to my own heart. I think that these paragraphs, and I'm going to read a bit at length, so be patient with me saying your own words. I think that this represents a lot of the concerns and intuitions, particularly around Gaza. So you're right. Some German journalists have even justified the killing of their Palestinian colleagues. The clearest example is Axel Springer, Europe's largest publisher and owner of Bild, Germany's biggest newspaper, and I must add, owner of Politico, one of the biggest European politics operations in terms of media. Hours after the killing of Anas al-Sharif became public, Bild splashed his image under this headline: "Terrorists disguised as journalists killed in Gaza," which was later changed to "Journalist killed was allegedly a terrorist." Let that sink in. About a week before, Bild had published another piece. "This Gaza photographer stages Hamas propaganda," was the headline. The article targeted the Palestinian photographer Anas Sayed Fatia, accused him of staging images of starving Palestinians as parts of a Hamas campaign, despite the evidence that the subjects of the photograph were indeed starving and waiting for food. In the article, Fatia's title as journalist appears in quotation marks, implying that he wasn't a real journalist and that images of starvation were exaggerated fabrications. The Bild story, along with a similar piece in the liberal Süddeutsche Zeitung, was swiftly amplified on X, on Twitter, by Israel's foreign ministry, which cited them as proof that Hamas manipulates global opinion. Fatia was branded an Israel and Jew hater serving Hamas. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation quickly piled on, joined by right-wing influencers. In this case, and this is where I wanted to get, in this case, German media had become a direct pipeline for Israeli talking points quickly recycled into the international arena and repackaged as evidence. And I think that it's very important to underscore the fact that this was not just Springer, which is essentially very much associated not only with the right, but with the most extreme far right in Germany. I mean, Springer were the ones that, by grace of Martin Barsavsky, published, who was part of the board, published
Right.
Elon Musk's praise of AfD, but also the Süddeutsche Zeitung, which is a putative center-left operation.
Yeah.
So how have we gotten to the point in which, in a state of conflict, we have a media that essentially is just doing propaganda for one of the two sides, full stop?
This is the core question, right? I mean, this is the key question that, like, I think so many of us that are looking at Western media vis-a-vis Gaza are kind of struggling to understand and trying to find answers for. And I don't have like an all-encompassing one answer for, but I do think there's a few factors kind of coming together here. One is like this, what Bild exemplified here is something I think pretty radical, and like something that should actually also be subject to legal repercussions, or at least legal sort of interventions, like trying to understand if there's not a way to sort of like make this a case about incitement, because I think that's frankly what it is. It's not. It's both the kind of smearing after the fact of the murder and the kind of preemptive sort of smearing that legitimizes the murder. I mean, like, as you read the paragraph, that's basically the argument I'm trying to make, right? I mean, it's that, like, it's kind of both sides of the propaganda apparatus are being elevated and provided with actual material by quote unquote journalists. I mean, this is not journalism. This is like the service of state violence. But why are liberal outlets so often kind of complicit, or at least kind of part of the story? I'm not 100% sure. I mean, part of me is like, I think a big part of the story is this kind of preemptive acquiescence to an ideal of Staatsräson, an ideal of like something we need to kind of adhere to as German journalists in order to virtue signal that we're not anti-Semites and not, kind of like the expressions of our grandfathers and grandmothers who committed the Holocaust. And I think in like a kind of mainstream German mindset, a liberal mindset, this is often just like an easy shortcut way to signal that to the outside world. Like, you,
I mean, one of the
support,
things,
yeah,
one of the things that I saw fairly consistently at Deutsche Welle was an editorial room that kept more or less a constant eye to what others were saying, particularly emanating from Springer. There was a sense of fear almost. I mean, and I read this as consistent with mutual surveillance in the words of German traditions.
Yeah, there's a sense of fear, but there's also on top of it, I think, a sense of like, oh, this is an economical success model. I think that's another part of it that is often like completely overlooked, because I think we are witnessing for the past 10 to 15 years a complete crisis in journalism, of like journalism attempting to reinvent itself with the collapse of the print era. And I think this kind of clickbait, let's create like scandalizing headlines that like draw people in, that is actually, interestingly, I recently listened to a podcast where like on like how Google works and like how kind of AI is changing the digital markets and so on and so forth. And in that sense, I think that this kind of scandalizing clickbait model is actually not really working anymore in terms of like a technical aspect of the story. But like, still, I think a lot of outlets think that this is the way to go. This is the way to sell kind of subscriptions, and that's why they kind of like see the Bild model as the functioning one and are piling up to it. But I also want to go back to sort of just a minute to the concrete example, because the Süddeutsche article, I think the point in that case was not to kind of smear the journalist as kind of explicitly as Bild did, right? They didn't like call him a Hamas propagandist. What they did, they invited like a historian for a Bildhistoriker, like someone who researches the history of images, who apparently no clue whatsoever on either Gaza or Israel Palestine or anything related to the subject more broadly, and kind of like copy pasted those quotes into the article as if they were sort of like legitimate, as if they delivered some sort of like broadly legitimate like context for that. And like in the end of the day, it was proven that like the images like that Fateh did were not staged. Actually, these people were waiting in line for food. But this is like another part of the of this story is that like there's no. It seems to me there's a very limited understanding of like course correction within German journalism more broadly. I'm not sure if you agree with this, but like there's so
I
many
do.
things. So many things, so many articles, so much misinformation. The flower massacre, the Al Shifa hospital bombing, the 40 beheaded babies. So there's so many things that like so many statements by the Israeli military that later turned out to be false.
Fabrications, yeah.
Yeah, fabricated,
Yeah.
and were nevertheless without sort of like sufficient context into articles, and then in the aftermath are often not corrected at all. Like they're just like up to this day, and I don't really understand. Yeah, I think this is like in the Anglo market a little bit. There's a little bit of a different kind of handling with journalism in general.
I mean, there is much more, I think, of a will. In Spanish, there is a very specific term, which is fe de ratas, which means sort of a faithful or an honest account of our mistakes. And this is something that every once in a while you will see newspapers publish. Fe de rata, something that was said that was wrong.
Yeah.
It has been, I think, to a large degree forgotten. But I think that what you touch on is actually considerably more interesting than the question, if you don't mind me using your own point to criticize your own point. So defending you at the same time that I criticize it. I think that one of the most interesting points you make there is the fact that there is either a willing or unwitting, perhaps, but I tend to think that it's unwilling lack of expertise. That when the point needs to be made, of course, you can go into any German university and find somebody that might have absolutely no relation other than a very tenuous one with the issue, but you can still present them as experts. I actually will just take a very small detour, which is when the Greek crisis happened, as I was just starting at Deutsche Welle around 2014, 2015,
Right.
I remember being asked by a friend of mine, an economist in Cambridge, if there was anybody in the editorial group of business and economics at Deutsche Welle that had a PhD in economics. In other words, somebody that could actually read an equation and had a sense of like macroeconomic models. And it never occurred to me to ask. So I went back and I asked. And the fact is that there was none. The line was, well, this brown people south of Europe are sitting around in the near the water drinking ouzo. They do no work and they don't want to pay back what we good Germans have given them.
Of course, of course.
And the entire point, which was Varufakis' point to a large degree, which was, well, the question of the debt is not paying it back, it's how is it paid and whether the payment is sustainable, was never actually treated, was never dealt with. And I think that was, to some degree, willing incompetence. Was willing incompetence at the service of a political position, which at that point was the sort of Schäuble, Merkel approach to Southern Europe in general and to Greece in particular.
Yeah.
What I see now is something really quite similar.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very good way of putting it. And like, I think, part of it is actually from a psychological standpoint, that is completely understandable, right? I mean, like if you go too deep, if you really just, in the context of Gaza, sort of like, if you really engage the argument that like Germany out of like a sense, a strange interpretation of historical responsibility that led up to the kind of like, almost unconditional support of like a right-wing extremist / fascist government, that this led to like this kind of like interpretation based off of like an attempt to prevent genocide or a kind of like an awareness for genocide led up to supporting another genocide. I think that's a very grim, very dark kind of we got used to these ideas, to the fact that there is something to that. I'm obviously that's a very reduced way of telling the story, and there's so much more detail. But I think this is a kind of a terrifying notion, and the fact that like it's much easier, of course, to go through the world and like and try to find different, more easy explanations. Nevertheless, as journalists, I think that's exactly our job, right? I mean, to put the finger in the wound, to put
Yeah,
the finger on the spot where it hurts, to really try to question power dynamics. That's in a way it's something that I see is often missing within German newsrooms. And like I don't want to sound overly generalizing. I think like I speak about this with friends all the time, that like the kind of rhetorics against the media in Germany has become almost like a right-wing trope, in especially in the context of COVID.
right.
I think like the fact that people are losing so much trust in established legacy media institutions right now is like is also, I mean, it's an opportunity for people like you and me, maybe, but it's also a huge danger for feeding into like conspiratorial things,
Absolutely.
like the like black and white kind of right wing narratives. And I do see weird, anti-Semitic comments online once in a while of like
Yeah.
the Jews.
Well, you're
But
lucky. I
like,
mean, I
but that,
operate a lot.
it's like it's so not clear to me how newsrooms aren't seeing this. How are
Right.
people, how are journalists not seeing also the degree to which they are losing faith on the part of their audience? And like,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I do think very specifically that what we have had is, besides everything else, besides sort of the collapse of the technology and the shift in like newsrooms and the shift of reporting, and I think that this gets to the point of people like Anas Al Sharif and people like Bisan Oda and so on. I think that what we have had is a complete collapse of public trust in media. I mean, I saw Carl Kaljuwer saying that we are seeing across Europe a 30% trust on media, which essentially means that you have lost the population. And what that also means, incidentally, is that that has a massive effect on democratic architecture.
yeah,
Because the fact is that the way I see media, the way I see my work, the way I see journalism, is essentially as an extracurricular education. If the extracurricular education is telling you straight out lies, and I think that this was one of the interesting stories around the COVID vaccine, which was not the fact that it was not important or necessary, it was the fact that there is a strong sense that the consequences were hidden. So the
mm,
risk could not be afforded. If you actually spoke about the risk, then you were essentially a Nazi.
mm.
In the context of German media, most certainly, because as you said, they were very much push. I mean, I'm somebody that got vaccinated and so on and so forth. I mean, but the point is that there is an adult way to have the discussion as to what are the risks, and
Yes,
I
yes. And if we're honest, I mean, if I'm completely honest, it's a difficult discussion to have also because the political parameters are a little bit like flipped. Like the left in Germany specifically used to be the ones that are very sort of like skeptical of arguments that would call into question like a state campaign of like of sort of forcing citizens what to do. And I'm also vaccinated many times, and I find it like hard to understand why people would not. At the same time, I think like part of the kind of like the sort of the ease with which like newsrooms would kind of like quickly do away with or label certain perspectives as illegitimate or like
right.
conspiratorial or stupid or not worthy reporting. There were similarities, I think, and like it would be, historically speaking, in the future. I think like if we talk about the crisis of journalism, I think we if we're honest, and that goes back into police violence. Like again, like many of those demonstrations against vaccination or against, I'm not even sure what that means, but like they faced in the beginning similar like levels of police violence as we're seeing today against pro-Palestine
Right.
protesters. I'm not calling for like a kind of like like a broad ideological synthesis, but I think it would be like only consequential, would make sense to kind of like see the similarities in which like those
Well,
contexts strengthen
I, I
Germany.
I would make the following argument to reinforce your point: is that I don't think that the issue at all has to do with the specific content discussion. It doesn't have to do with the substantive debate about whether it's vaccines or Gaza. I think that basically what we're seeing now in the demonstrations on Gaza, and I want to get to that, and that we saw at the beginning of the demonstrations with vaccine, is essentially preventing public deliberation on these issues. It's like, well, this is the position that we take. This is a position that is being spread through our media operation. And anything that talks to the contrary will either be mocked, will be essentially silenced, or will be beaten up in the middle of the streets. And I don't think, to be quite honest, I mean, and this to me has become really an important matter. I don't really think that when I got, pushed out of Deutsche Welle, or when people were being told that they were like, what do they call them? COVIDiots. That was the expression, COVIDiots, or when people are being told that they're Hamas because they're Hamas, right? Because they're demonstrating in the street. I don't really think that they are actually the object of the repression. I think that they're the instrument of the repression in order to create a state of broad intimidation in which other journalists know that if they actually put up their head above the parapet, they will be shot, they will be fired. Other people don't send their 13-year-olds to Alexanderplatz because, then you see like 14-year-old girls being carried by 4 gorillas, like in full like riot gear. So I don't think that the point is, that particular 14-year-old. I mean, that 14-year-old has no political clout. I think that is, to me, what is surprising, back to your article in some sense, is that there is a willingness to dismantle essentially the post-war German project, which, you were born into, but I chose it. I came here because I was sold that story.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. This is like we're seeing something that is, I think the story, and we should all remember this, is the genocide in Gaza right now, and this is something we should definitely keep our eyes on the ball in that sense, and like really try to tell it as crystal clear as possible to prevent the very much inevitable distortions that we are very likely to see years from now. But coming back to Omar al-Akkad, when at some point everyone will have been against this. But I agree with you what you're saying. I think the story is bigger. It's also like the dismantling not only the post-war liberal or post-reunification liberal order and German memory culture, but also the kind of I think liberal order as such. I mean, we're living in this age of like global authoritarianism and remilitarization. I think it's just like neatly feeding into the idea of a state that whenever you disagree with the broader state narrative, you might just be beat up in the streets, and it's as easy as that.
I want to ask you to perhaps walk us through, I mean, even if in a succinct form, over what I think it's probably one of the most scandalous parts of like the German participation in the Israeli, active participation in the Israeli genocidal project, which is the Bibi leaks.
Sure.
I think that many people are not quite familiar with it, but Germany, and particularly Springer, played a sort of really punch way above its weight in terms of what happened there. So,
okay, so the Bibi leaks is basically Bibi is the abbreviation used within like euphemistically within Israel for Benjamin Netanyahu, and the leaks that is referring to is basically a trove of classified Israeli military information referring to a Hamas strategy paper that was found sometime around early/summer last year, and attributed wrongfully so to Yahya Sinwar, who was at the time still the leader of Hamas, who is by now killed. And when we speak about Israeli media, we need to keep in mind that there's something like military censorship that Israeli journalists want to report on that relates to military operations or secret documents or anything that could expose the kind of like military strategy within Israel is like it has to be sent to the military censor, meaning that like they sign off of it or don't. which is this is like a side note, but like which is also why, actually for Israeli journalists, it is so important that Western journalists do their job, because often, even if they want to report on something, they cannot, like this goes both ways, they cannot often report on it. However, what I want to say, like basically Bibi Netanyahu was attempting, he faced a lot of pressure internally from within Israel, because there were these 6 hostages that were kind of believed to still be alive, and they were found dead by the military in Gaza. Whether they were killed by Hamas or not is inconclusive, but like likely they were killed by Hamas. So there was a huge protest against Netanyahu on part of like the hostage families and the kind of liberal Israelis that marched to the streets and were like kind of demanding an end to the war, and were already sort of anticipating, which is like a fact, that Bibi was not ever interested in ending this, in reaching a deal with Hamas. A deal was on the table time and again from October 23 up until today. Like Hamas was ready for negotiations. Bibi did not want that. There is like countless investigations that prove that, like minute by minute. But this specific leak that we're speaking about is like, so Bibi wanted this like strategy paper published because allegedly what it was proving was the opposite of reality, which is that it was not him who wasn't interested in a deal, but it was Hamas who wasn't interested in a deal. Like the paper was supposed to say something along the lines that like basically Hamas wants to hold off of like the deal, it wants to keep the hostages, and wants to prevent the deal. So he was trying to get this published within, like his office was trying to get this published within Israeli media, and it didn't manage to do it because of the military censor that I mentioned earlier. Now their idea, and like we're speaking about, if I say them, we're speaking about like his aides, the close associates to Netanyahu, who are like people partly from the advertisement industry, like Solik Einhorn and Jonathan Urich, who are now like actually prosecuted for this instance we're speaking about. But what they came up was okay, let's send this to like the foreign press. And who is close to these Netanyahu aides first? It's Paul Ronsheimer. It's like the co-head of the Bild, was then, there's text messages that are between that, because it was prosecuted. There's like a very meticulous kind of record of how that process went on. So there's text messages between those aides that prove that like we sent it to the Bild, the boss is happy. The boss meaning Bibi Netanyahu. The Bild published this thing without apparently checking it at all. Like what they published is an extremely distorted version of the actual original document. The original document is obviously in Arabic. They completely missed the central parts. What they published is a propaganda piece of disinformation that absolves Netanyahu of any kind of responsibility for reaching a deal. It like completely puts the blame of like not having a deal for the hostages and like the ceasefire on Hamas. And that way Netanyahu could like say, oh look, like Germany's biggest newspaper, the Bild, and he does this in a cabinet meeting, famously so. He says, look at the Bild, they're publishing that it's Hamas's fault. They don't want a deal. It's not us. Don't worry. And like this strategy really worked. Like he really managed like silence the protest at home, to silence the pressure cooker, so to speak, and basically paint all these protesters that are like, for whatever reasons you might disagree with them or agree with them, but like he paints them as like unwilling pawns of Hamas. And what I find so insane, for lack of a better word, about this story is that like not only did Bild in this instance, and by the way, this was not reported on in Germany almost at all, up to the point where one of those Netanyahu aides that I mentioned earlier was actually arrested by Shin Bet, by the internal security service in Israel, because this was not, because it also went against like internal Israeli regulation, because they published classified information in the foreign press. But it was there was almost no scrutiny whatsoever up until like the point that like he was arrested. Beforehand, like I had reported about this, another German journalist, Matthias Monroy, had reported about it, and like a bunch of Israeli journalists reported about it, like basically showing that like the document was not found as Bild alleged on Yahya Sinwar's computer. It was not actually a new document. It was published months earlier. It was drafted by a mid-range level Hamas agent. It didn't speak for a supposed like Hamas like higher level strategy. It also was wrongly quoted in the original Arabic. I mean, these guys are no experts. It's not like they looked at this and really checked it. They just published it. And I actually sent a letter to the Presserat, which is like supposed to. I filed a formal complaint because I was like, guys, this is state misinformation standing online without corrections, sort of absolving Bibi Netanyahu of any responsibility. And they were basically coming back to. They actually sent me a letter back, said we checked it, we can't verify what you're saying. Thank you very much, but
Remarkable.
yeah. So essentially, I mean, what this shows, and like Paul Ronsheimer, without like wanting to get too personal here, but it's truly bizarre to me that the New York Times at this point reported about this, the CNN reported about this, like all the major international Western, like there's no excuse for not seeing this story. No excuse whatsoever. They all reported about this thing, and Ronsheimer is invited to Markus Lanz and all the big formats and like sort of like speculates on Israel.
Television formats.
Yes.
Interview television.
What's going on here? This is a fucking disgrace. I mean, I'm sorry. This is this is so obscene. Like even if my only interest in this current quote unquote escalation is the Israeli hostages, okay? Even if I don't care about Palestinians whatsoever, which is obviously not the case with me, yeah. But like even if that's no, this should upset me very much. And Israeli hostage families are actually way more explicit about this than the German, like pro-Israel right or liberals, because they
well, I think it also
the point of it. But like I think there's something about this that is so scandalous because it even if it like subverts the own logic of supposedly caring about hostages. No, it
hostages, right?
puts the hostages in danger actively by Bild Zeitung, by a German newspaper, and like.
Well, it also helped to a large degree to sink ceasefire negotiations immediately in the aftermath, because it wasn't also only that it wasn't me who sank the ceasefire. Everything that came afterward was, I mean, for a couple of months at least, or a couple of weeks, tainted by this.
Yeah.
And actually, families of hostages made very clear. I mean, Aretz covered this as well.
And how do you look in the mirror? Like how do you wake up as a journalist, kind of like having this job that is supposed to, I mean, apparently journalism means nothing. Like it means very different things to different people, but like if it doesn't mean like at least questioning existing power dynamics, like what are you doing? Like this is kind of the question I'm asking myself. Like how do you look yourself in the mirror if like all you're doing is being a sort of like indirect aid to a genocidal regime, like putting into danger like.
Well, I would add that sort of in a context of a democracy like the German one, the sentiment of the public concerning what is that Israel is doing has a direct impact on what is that the government is going to do with Israel. So that is to say, when we see Friedrich Merz go to Republica and do his little dance on stage, saying things like, I told Netanyahu that this is unacceptable or something like that. That is the product of public pressure. And insofar as media is actually the one defining, to a large degree, I think it's true that it's no longer the case. I mean, we have a collapse in confidence, but insofar as the media is telling you that the Israelis are sort of operating, just a kosher restaurant in Gaza, then obviously the public is less inclined to actually demand that the political system in Germany takes action against Israel. So I think that in some sense the complicity, I mean, from my point of view, it's not only deeper, but it's considerably more sinister and has much more of an effect, almost directly, on the deaths in Gaza.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I agree. And like, I mean, this travesty of journalism, which was the Bibi leaks, I think just shows to you, like, I mean, I the fact that like major German outlets didn't immediately jump on this. This is something that I don't understand. Like, why is there such a credulity towards a clearly right-wing / far-right outlet like Bild? Why do we let these people control public discourse in that way? Like, why are we not sort of like more more inquisitive, more sort of like, why is this not frontline news? I mean, it's.
I will say that, I mean, clearly there is no way to make a man understand whose life depends in not understanding. But it's a line that I quite like. But having had a lot of, over the last 2 years, a lot of conversations with a lot of people working in newsrooms, one of the things that I find very puzzling is a general tendency to exculpate or to excuse this kind of coverage. It's like, well, we are actually talking about, no, you're not. Or we have mentioned in some paragraph somewhere in a report, BB leaks. In a sense, there is this sort of excuse or like constant explanation for an incapacity or an unwillingness to really do agenda setting in a way that is morally required in the conditions of war crimes, crimes against humanity, infanticide, and a genocide.
Yeah.
And that to me is just absolutely incredible. I mean, it's really something that I myself struggle with. I want to ask you, I have just two more questions. You've been very generous with your time, but there are a bunch of figures that basically float around this media machine, and you mentioned Paul. Exactly, yeah. But there are also people like Iman Safite and so on and so forth. There are kind of steady figures that float around. The thing that is quite interesting about Welt and people around Welt, which also belongs to Springer, is that they had been pretty much involved in, and this is particularly the case of Sephati, in the intimidation of demonstrators during demonstrations. So these guys go out, they take cameras, they stand with the police, and they kind of, sometimes insult, sometimes kind of egg on or like prod people that are demonstrating. I mean, I've seen enough images of this particular gentleman standing at the margins of demonstrators, kind of mocking them or like laughing at demonstrators and so on. What do you make of that? I mean, what there is here a clear line in which these people cross into activism, and okay, that could be said also probably from you and myself, but there is something here which is an active collaboration with state security forces, right? Going out there and standing with the police in riot gear that are about to like beat up demonstrators.
Look, I think in general, it's very hard to understand to me, like how the story isn't about kind of if you look at the protests, if you've been to any number of these protests, you'll always find this one out of like 1,000 or 10,000 protesters. You'll always find this one protester who carries a sign that is a little bit like dumb, or maybe guard, or maybe one person shouts something that is actually anti-Semitic. Maybe this happens, and like that is a real problem. At the same time, I think it's expectable that like dumb people will join things that are mass movements. Like this is not a huge surprise for me, and like I find it very interesting and illuminating that like it seems that the biggest story for many of the people, journalists, come to the demonstrations is not the absolutely obvious degree of police repression and violence cracking down and really unleashed, in the case of Berlin, like city policy vis-a-vis protesters, but it is the kind of attempt to kind of smear people, the kind of attempt to sort of depict those protesters as like support.
It's kind of remarkable, I must say, that like we're more worried about anti-Semitism of like one guy shouting, death to Israel, than we're worried about like policemen coming in and whisking away Jewish demonstrators. I mean, including people like Iris Hefetz, a 70-year-old woman, like basically who presents no clear danger and is being whisked away. I mean, so there is something quite incredible about it.
Have you been to any of those demonstrations? Have you reported on this, or just like seen?
No,
Um,
no, no. I have not. I have not. I will say that it's the kind of thing that I'm afraid of,
hmm.
because I do see them being completely off the chain, like the police department, and um, I think that being already very exposed, I'm trying. I mean, and having been investigated and having been investigated by the German police, by the Berlin police for presume trivialization of the Holocaust and so on and so forth. I mean, I'm very weary of putting myself in the line of fire. I mean, much like I think you're also part of the 10 worst anti-Semites of Germany, according to the IDF blacklist, right? The Shalikar blacklist. So,
Yeah, I mean,
um,
no, we can laugh about, and they're like Shalika is like, there's some of the people who are legitimizing or apologizing, mass killing perpetrated by Israel are more intelligent and some are less intelligent. I think Shalika is clearly on the lesser spectrum
right.
of two ends. I think that's
No, I think you're completely right. But I saw Tilo Yung about a week ago make, I think, a case that is really worth repeating, which is that when this happened, and he was at the top of that list, he was the worst anti-Semite
yeah.
in that list of 10 people. Um, what he pointed out is that not one colleague in mainstream German media came out to say these are 10 people, our colleagues, being threatened by the representative of a foreign army engaged in this moment, not
Yeah,
only in genocide, but in the killing of journalists.
absolutely.
And I
Like
think that he's completely correct about that. That
I,
is, to me,
like
incredible.
without blowing my own horn here, like I mean, because I'm part of that story. Like even if I wasn't on that list, I would be, first of all, let's sort of acknowledge for a minute that like despite the fact that it dilutes the notion of anti-Semitism to a vulgar degree and makes it actually harder for Jews to make the case that
Well,
they're
so let me just very briefly interrupt you. I mean, this
yeah.
is something that to me is boggling. It's really, I mean, it's absolutely incredible that somebody would dare to say that Hanno Hauenstein or Tilo Jung sits in the same category than Goebbels and Hitler.
Hmm.
I mean, there is something about this that is the most incredible service that one could possibly render Hitler and Goebbels and everybody else, right? So, I mean, it is a degree of
Yeah.
trivialization that
Yeah.
I never thought I would actually witness.
Yeah. I mean, like you can speak to this, of course, better as you're yourself Jewish, but like, I mean, that's another, I mean, this is like one aspect of it, but and the other one is, of course, like the actually very real damage to your career because I think it is true that many outlets, even though he's like Shalika is really like a hillbilly in terms of like human intelligence, but like I think the kind of chilling effect this has maybe on editors who see this and maybe feel like we know how the discourse works in Germany, like you
Right.
get easily and that's like a hands-off kind of reflex, but yeah, I think essentially it's just also sad to me to see that like there is this kind of this instrumentalization is happening in such a kind of like anti-intellectual way. There is like a lack of solidarity in the parts of colleagues. It is true, like it is really missing. Like it would be kind of a minimum charge. And I saw recently, like an invitation of like German representatives of parliament who like were planning to go on a trip to Israel. There was a list that was leaked of like what their kind of program is, and like one of the program points was meeting Arya Shalika and like going for and being, and this is something that's a little bit insane to me. I mean, like this, so we are legitimizing this part. Like the trip didn't happen in the end because it kind of coincided with the Iran attacks, and then like it was canceled. But this
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not
I mean, our
not like
representatives are meeting up with the people that are putting us on blacklists.
yes, I mean, what's going on? And like, if this comes from an army that systematically kills people right next door, I mean, this is a little bit like concerning.
Yeah, yeah. No, no. I completely agree. I mean, I think that this also, you know, I have the very strong feeling that for a very long time I hated journalism and journalists, and I refuse to be called that. I mean, I really, even all the years that I was in Deutsche Welle, is like, no, that's not quite what I am.
Hmm.
And then Gaza happened.
Hmm.
And what happened in Gaza is that people like Anas al-Sharif, people like Bisan, people like Motasem al-Dalul, people like Motaz Azaiza popped out of nowhere. And I'm going to tell you a story that you might not know, but I was studying, well, this is not the main story, but I was studying Arabic. And because most of my relations are either Lebanese or Palestinian or Syrians, I'm basically interested in learning Levantine. And there is a YouTube channel that's been going around for a very long time that is easy language. So you get easy Russian, easy Arabic. And Easy Arabic had this young girl that was going around the streets of Gaza with a microphone asking people, what is your favorite food that your mother cooks? What do you think is the best place to see in Gaza? That
Mhm.
was Bisan. That was Bisan Oda
Oh, wow.
2 years before, 3 years before this nightmare started. So when I saw her pick up her cell phone and do what she has done for us for the last 2 years.
Hmm.
First, I mean, a new hero was built for me. Also, somebody that I had seen evolved from this like sort of shy girl asking questions about falafel.
Wow.
But then, like, what also happened was that I saw, and I don't want to sound too romantic about this, but it is something that touches me profoundly. I saw not only the rebirth of journalism, I saw, okay, now we can see what journalism actually is and what is the nobility and what is the courage and why is it that we need it. But it made me not only proud of saying that I'm a journalist, it actually made me wonder if I really deserve the title, seeing what these people have done. um, they have made me, in any case, optimistic. And if this is actually the last images that we have from of journalism are people like Bisan, like Motas, and like Anas, then I think that at least the epitaph has been a glorious epitaph to the story of like a political power within the state that was important.
Hmm.
That is a bit of my feel. I want to ask you a very final question, which is um, sorry, which is about where do you think that the state reason and public sentiment in relation with Israel uh, in the German public, in the German public sphere, which of course has a lot of influence in Europe, where do you think it stands? And what do you think that means in terms of media?
Where the Staatsräson sort of like stands at the moment, or?
I mean, Israel in the public German public imaginary.
Mhm. You know, it's difficult to say. I think like the public imaginary is still sort of very much centered around this notion of idealizing Israel. Again, coming back to what we spoke about earlier, this kind of like distorted idea of memory culture that it's like a shortcut to virtue signal your kind of like own legitimacy as a German person with a German identity. I think that still exists as a prevalent kind of vector within culture. But at the same time, you know, there's an entire generation that didn't grow up with romanticized images of kibbutzim and you know, like people harvesting field.
Cucumbers in the middle of them. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what they see is an occupying power, and you know, frankly, we, as in my generation beforehand, could have seen that just as much. However, I think that it's like becoming ever more clear, and like the last 2 years are a shifter for sure. And like I think that's something that's not. I don't feel like these kind of romanticized, sort of reductive images that are kind of predicating the history of Israel Palestine entirely on the German narrative and completely excluding the Nakba from the image are not going to survive. I think this is going to lead to a rewriting of history that must take into account the history of Palestinian dispossession that is obviously ongoing as we speak, and that will be to some degree changing, but it will be a change it will not come natural. You know, like I mean, speculation is always the lowest form of journalism, but like, I feel like I'm very kind of like confident that like unless we are actively putting Palestinians in the center to tell their story, and unless we are actively trying to also bring our narratives to the table, your narrative, I think, matters to a great deal, and not only your personal identity, but also the kind of struggles you have been going through in Deutsche Welle. I think this is a story that's going to be told, and like whatever lack of attention it has gotten within the German media environment, it will get in the future. I think these things are so important. They're part of the story, and you can't disentangle the kind of German sort of like illiberalism and move to authoritarianism with the kind of support for what is happening in Gaza. That's in a way that needs to change, but like we need to also actively continue to call out whether it's media complicity or just a general sense of reductiveness within culture.
Hanno Hauenstein, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's
For me
always
too.
fun to see you.
Speaking to you. Thank you so much for this. This was a lot of fun.
It's been great. I want to thank you again for the article. It really was. It was great to read. It feels like a personal vindication in that sorts of ways, and I'm sure it was. I can tell you, I'm sure that it was for a lot of people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're happy to hear that. Have a great day, Martin. Let's talk
soon.
You too.
Take care. Talk soon.
Bye-bye.